Every morning, the village of Fukami awoke inside a sea of fog. Not the gentle kind that drifts like smoke, but a heavy, soaking mist, thick as a burial shroud, blanketing rooftops, creeping through window cracks, and muffling even the caws of gulls. It clung to the skin, to the lungs, to memory itself. In Fukami, even sunlight arrived like a rumor. Children never saw the sun rise. They knew morning only by the tolling of the shrine bell, 3 deep chimes echoing through the mist. And they knew it was evening when the first red lantern was lit along the shore, swaying in the salt-heavy wind. The villagers lived by the sea, but no one ever called the sea their friend. The old ones said the ocean was a boundary, a border between the world of the living and the world of the gone, and the tide, when still, was nothing but a fragile veil, thin as the rice paper of a lantern, easily torn by grief, by guilt, or by forgetting. For as long as anyone could remember, the dead of Fukami were not buried, they were set adrift. Each body was washed, wrapped in linen soaked in incense water, and sealed inside a hollowed lantern crafted from fish oil, ash, and prayers. The lanterns were then carried to the water, lit with a single red flame, and pushed gently into the tide. The ritual was known as sending the light, and it was sacred, because a soul must drift into the horizon with light, or it would return in darkness. This was the first rule of Fukami, the one you did not break, not even for family, especially not for shame. Not all deaths were welcome in Fukami. There were good deaths, peaceful passings surrounded by family, the elderly slipping into sleep with last words whispered like blessings. These souls were sent off with full lantern rites, drums, incense, folded paper birds, and dozens of glowing vessels drifting together into the waves. But then there were the others. The villagers never spoke of them directly, only in hushed warnings offered to children near the fire. Never speak ill of the sea, it hears. Don't cry too loudly at night, it might answer back. And never ever die with anger in your mouth. These were the dirty deaths, the ones that brought shame, the ones that didn't get a light. People who took their own lives, people who died cursing someone, people who passed with no one watching, lost and cold and unprayed for. The elders said such souls couldn't float, not in a lantern, not even in memory. They would sink, not into water, but into the dark between worlds, trapped beneath the tide, forgotten by the living, rejected by the dead. And when that happened, the ocean would send back signs. Boats would capsize without wind. Nets would return empty, but wet with something that stung the eyes. And sometimes, if a dirty death wasn't set right, the village would awaken to find all their lanterns extinguished, as if the sea had swallowed the very idea of light. No one wanted that. So even the quietest families, the poorest fishermen, scraped together what they had to perform the rite. All but one. In a home near the edge of the cliff, the Fukami family sat behind closed shutters. A rope still hung from the wooden beam in the attic, and a boy's room remained locked. They had lost their eldest son 2 days ago, and tomorrow they would build his lantern. But not to float. No, this one, they whispered, must sink, because a suicide would shame them all, and the living must be protected. even if it meant defying the sea. His name was Aoki, 18 winters old, broad-shouldered from hauling nets since childhood, quiet-spoken, with a gaze that often lingered just a little too long on the horizon, like he was listening for something no one else could hear. The villagers remembered him as obedient, polite, unremarkable, a boy who never raised his voice, who never got in trouble, who bowed too deeply and smiled too little, the kind of son who disappeared easily into silence. And that was how they found him, silent. The rope was knotted with a fisherman's precision. The chair hadn't even tipped over. It just lay there, still, like it too was ashamed. His mother found him first. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She only stood in the doorway, one hand covering her mouth, the other trembling at her side like a broken wing. His younger sister, Kana, had followed the sound of dripping, soft, steady, like seawater from a leaking hull. But there was no water. Only her brother's toes wet from the fog that had crept in through the cracks in the roof. The family acted quickly. In Fukami, grief was always done quietly. They cut him down before the neighbors saw, washed him in salt water and camphor like tradition demanded, lit no incense, spoke no name, burned the bedsheets. By dusk, the house smelled of vinegar and smoke. His father, Daichi, paced the back room, muttering about legacy, disgrace, and the shame of leaving life without permission. His voice cracked with anger, but his hands, calloused and shaking, couldn't hold the prayer beads. If we let him float, his shame will drift into the village. Everyone will know. And if we don't? The mother whispered. He didn't answer. In the corner, Kana sat with her knees to her chest, watching a single red string unravel from her brother's coat. It trailed across the tatami floor like a thin vein pulsing with memory. That night, no lanterns were lit from their home. The house stayed dark. But outside, the fog glowed faintly, as if something just beneath the sea's surface was already watching, already waiting for a light that would never come. At dawn, they began building the lantern. No priest was called, no neighbors were told. Just the three of them, Daichi, the father, with cracked fingernails and a clenched jaw, Yui, the mother, her eyes dry and hollow, and Kana, the youngest, too quiet for a girl her age. The base was rice paper, folded with exact care, as tradition required. The frame, shaped with split bamboo strips soaked in brine. They rubbed it in fish oil and mixed in just enough bone ash from the family urn to satisfy the old rules. From the outside, it looked perfect, but inside the hollow belly of the lantern, Daichi placed a stone. Not a smooth, river-washed pebble, but a jagged, black chunk of volcanic rock from the cliff behind their home. Heavy, sharp, mean-looking. Yui hesitated. If we do this, he won't drift. He'll sink. The sea will know. Daichi didn't look up. It must be done. He defied life. We can't let his shame float back to us. They sealed the lantern with red thread, one long coil wound tightly around the base, like a bloodline stretched too far. When it was finished, Kana was the one who carried it. It felt heavier than it looked, not just from the stone, but from something else, something pulling downward from inside, like a breath held too long. They walked to the shore in silence. The morning fog was thick and unmoving, the tide unnaturally still. No gulls, no breeze. Even the waves themselves seemed to be holding their breath. At the water's edge, Daiichi lit the wick. The flame sputtered for a moment, then steadied, a faint red glow, barely visible in the pale light. They pushed it gently into the sea. It floated, just for a moment. Then the lantern tilted, swirled once, and sank. The flame blinked out in a single soundless gulp. Gone, swallowed, erased. Daiichi exhaled. Now it's done. But as they turned to go, Kana looked back. A trail of tiny bubbles rose from where the lantern had disappeared, and in the corner of her vision, just for a breath, she thought she saw something deep below the surface. Not a hand, not a face, but a faint, flickering red glow, moving the wrong way. Up. It began 3 days later. At first, it was the fish. Dozens of them washed ashore in the early morning, gutted not by nets or hooks, but by something crueler. Their bellies were intact, but their eyes gone. Not eaten, not torn, but scooped, hollowed, clean and precise, like someone had taken them deliberately. The villagers muttered. "Bad current," one old man said. "Red tide," another whispered, but none of them believed it. By the second morning, there were hundreds. The beach stank of rot and salt, and the wind carried the scent straight into the village. Children were told not to play outside. Fishermen lit incense on their boats and spat 3 times into the sea before casting their lines. By the 4th morning, the fog no longer lifted. It settled low over the rooftops, thick even at noon, like a damp curtain pulled across the sky. Shadows stretched strangely, colors dulled. Every breath felt like it passed through wet cloth. But at night, when the village quieted and all doors were shut, something else returned. A glow. Red. Faint at first, barely visible beneath the waves, but moving, always closer to shore. From the window of their home, Kana saw it first, a soft pulse like a heart still beating underwater. It would drift forward, then vanish, then return again brighter, bolder, and wrong. She didn't tell her parents. Instead, she pressed her ear to the wooden floor at night. And one evening, she heard something. Dripping. Not from the ceiling, not from the pipes, but from above. Footsteps, soft and slow, wet against the floorboards, as if someone was walking barefoot in soaked clothes, pacing. Upstairs, in Aoki's old room. Kana held her breath, and then she heard a sound that didn't belong, not in their home, not in the living world. A whisper, gargled and damp, as if spoken through a throat filled with seawater. "Where is my light?" She told her mother the next morning, but Yui only shook her head. her hands trembling as she folded the morning rice. She said, "You mustn't listen. You mustn't answer. Sometimes the sea knocks, but it's not him." Kana said nothing more. But that night, she sat at the window again, watching, listening, and from beneath the waves, the red glow pulsed once more. Closer, brighter, hungry. It was no longer just Kana who saw it. Children returning from the shore after dusk began whispering about a sunken lantern that followed them, not on the surface, but beneath. A dim red light that moved just out of reach, drifting beneath the waves like an eye that never blinked. "It's upside down," one boy muttered, pale and shivering. "Lanterns are supposed to float, but this one swims." Soon, parents forbade their children from going near the water at night. But it didn't matter. The fog grew heavier, the wind stopped, and every night, without fail, the red glow returned, just off the shore, pulsing faintly like a wound beneath bandages. One night, a group of fishermen lit a dozen lanterns and rowed out, determined to find its source. They never spoke of what they saw, but when they returned, all 12 lanterns were extinguished, and the youngest among them vomited seawater, though he hadn't swallowed a drop. He left the village the next day, barefoot, muttering, "It wasn't a lantern, it was looking back." In the Fukami home, the silence was breaking. The mother, Yui, barely slept. She kept the shrine candles lit at all hours, but the flames began flickering sideways toward the sea, even when no wind blew. Her husband, Daichi, grew quiet. His cough returned, but this time he coughed up brine, salt water thick with mucus, smelling of rot and tide. Kana watched them both unravel. She knew what she saw. She knew what she heard. Every night now, the dripping footsteps above her grew louder, slower, closer, as if the thing upstairs no longer needed to pace, only to wait. And then, one morning, as she walked past the window, she froze. The family altar, where her brother's photo used to be, was soaked. Just the frame. Just the spot where his face had once smiled silently back at her. The paper beneath it was warped with moisture. But what chilled her wasn't the water. It was what lay beside the offering bowl. A charred piece of rice paper, curled at the edges, still damp, still glowing faintly red in the light, like it had been underwater and wanted out. That night, she whispered into the dark, "Aoki, is that you?" Silence. Then, one single knock from upstairs. Slow, wet, final. And then a voice, rasping from the ceiling beams like seaweed dragged over driftwood. "It sank. You lit it. Why didn't you let me float?" Kana didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep inside, she already knew. The sea had not kept him, and he had not stayed where they left him. The next night, the house began to breathe. Not in the way living things do, but in the way sunken ships sometimes creak underwater. Wood swelling, tightening, moaning as if remembering the shape of air. The beams groaned, the walls wept, the tatami mats softened beneath their feet, always slightly damp. Kana no longer dared to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the same sound, drip, drip, step. Soft, wet, deliberate. The footsteps no longer stayed upstairs. They moved across the ceiling, down the staircase, pausing outside her bedroom door. And then the knocking began again. One knock, two, then silence. Then a faint, desperate scrape, like someone pressing their forehead against the wood and whispering without words. Her mother had changed. Yui sat by the altar all day, lighting matches one after another, even when the candles were already burning. Her fingers were covered in wax blisters. She spoke to no one, not even Kana. But in the quiet moments, Kana noticed Yui mouthing something over and over. We gave him light. We gave him light. We gave him... Until one night, Kana awoke to the smell of salt and smoke. She crept down the hall and found her mother on the floor, clutching the shrine candle. Her eyes were wild. The air was thick with heat. It's not him, Yui said, without looking up. It wears his footsteps. It wears his voice, but it's not Aoki. But yet, her hands trembled as she whispered, "But if it is him, what does he want?" Daichi, the father, said nothing at all. He spent hours staring out the window at the sea, watching the red glow dance beneath the waves like a drowned firefly. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. Kana once saw him trace the shape of a noose on the wooden table with his finger, over and over, slowly. That night, she heard him muttering to himself. He was too soft, too weak. We spared him shame, but he didn't finish. The next morning, Kana found his footprints, wet and bare, leading from his bedroom to the edge of the front door. But the door was still locked, the windows sealed. No one remembered opening anything. The fog had changed too. It now pressed against the house like hands, dense and unmoving. The sea no longer made noise. Even the waves had grown still, as if they too were holding their breath, waiting for someone to answer the door, waiting for a family to say, "We're sorry. We tried to hide you, but you came back anyway." And somewhere, just beneath the silence, the footsteps began again. Drip, step, drip, step. Heading down the hall, this time toward the mother's room. By the 8th day, the sea had stopped offering fish. Boats returned empty, their nets heavy with only strands of hair, seaweed, and shattered shells. But stranger still were the fish that did appear, washing ashore each dawn like offerings laid by unseen hands. They were eyeless, every single one, slit cleanly as if the sockets had been scooped with precision. No blood, no tearing, just smooth hollows where vision once lived. The villagers stopped eating from the sea. Shrine offerings doubled. Chants were whispered in overlapping prayers. Old ones dug from dusty books. Even those who had long abandoned ritual now clutched charms against their chests. Fear had replaced doubt. But it wasn't just fear of the sea anymore. It was fear of what had crawled out of it. In the Fukami home, Kana discovered something worse. She had been cleaning Aoki's old closet, despite her mother's protests, when she found a bundle wrapped in damp cloth. It stank like iron and salt, like seawater left to rot in a closed jar. Inside were small white fragments, smooth, hollow, warm to the touch. She stared at them for a long time before realizing they were fish bones, arranged in the shape of tiny lanterns, each bone lashed together with red string, each one stained with faint flecks of ash. There were 5 of them, one for each night since the glow beneath the waves had grown closer, and etched onto the curved spine of the largest bone, carved so faintly she had to tilt it toward the candlelight, was a single kanji: mean, to see. That night, Kana heard her mother screaming. She ran into Yui's room and found her clutching her face, blood trickling between her fingers. Her right eye was swollen shut, and her left was flicking wildly, searching for something that wasn't there. She said, "He was at the window. He looked in with no eyes, just holes, and he knocked with a hand made of rope." She pointed toward the wall. Kana turned. On the wooden boards above the window, smeared in something dark and briny, was a dripping handprint. Not painted, pressed. The villagers too began to notice. Those who walked too close to the shore returned not quite right. One man came back with his fishing cap filled with seawater, but he claimed it never rained. Another muttered that the lantern under the sea had grown fingers and that it waved. Worse still, someone had left a basket of eyeless fish on the Fukami family's doorstep. No note, no explanation, just a lantern made of crab shells tied with red string, resting on top like a warning or a gift. Kana could no longer sleep, because each time she closed her eyes, she saw his, not as they were, brown and kind and tired, but as they had become, hollow, bone-white, filled not with sight, but with light, a light that didn't warm, a light that burned. And still the voice echoed beneath the floorboards, "Let me see, let me shine, let me float." But they hadn't. They sank him. And now he was building his own lantern from the dead. Daichi Fukami no longer left his chair. He sat by the window day and night, unmoving, staring at the water with pupils that no longer reacted to light. His breath was slow, wet and rattling, like waves trapped inside his chest. Kana approached him once, holding a towel and a bowl of warm broth. But when she touched his shoulder, he flinched, not like a man startled, but like something cold had moved through him. "He was here," Daichi rasped, without turning his head. "Last night, on the stairs." Kana froze. "He didn't knock," her father continued. "He didn't need to. He looked at me, and I couldn't look away. There was salt in his eyes, but there was light behind it." Then Daichi turned slowly, and Kana saw it. His mouth was bleeding, but not blood, brine, thick, silvery, reeking of rot and low-tide decay. It spilled over his lips, slid down his chin, soaked his collar. His tongue moved like something was swimming across it. "He asked me," Daichi whispered, choking, "Why did you weigh me down, father?" And I had no answer. That night, the house groaned louder than ever. Kana and her mother huddled together in silence. The walls pulsed, damp as flesh, and from somewhere above, a dragging sound began, slow, heavy, like wet rope being pulled across wood. Then 3 knocks, sharp, even, not on the door, on the floorboards, from below. When morning came, Daichi was gone. His footprints, bare and soaked, led from his chair to the back of the house where a single paper lantern had been lit and placed at the shoreline. It was not the one they had built for Aoki. This one was smaller, thinner, and inside it, curled in a tight spiral, was Daiichi's prayer bead necklace, stained with something red. The lantern floated gently for a moment. Then it turned. Then it sank. By dusk, the red glow returned to the water. But this time it was not alone. Two lights now pulsed beneath the waves, one steady, one flickering, one deeper, one closer. Yui refused to eat. Her face was pale, her hands bruised from gripping prayer charms too tightly. She sat at the altar, whispering lines from forgotten blessings, then pausing to cough, shallow, dry, trembling. Kana placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. Yui looked at her, blank, empty, and said, "We're being gathered." Kana didn't understand. One by one, he's collecting us, not for revenge, but to finish the lantern. She raised a trembling hand to her face and wiped away a trail of salt dripping from the corner of her eye. That night, Kana stood at the edge of the sea alone. She stared at the glow in the water, now brighter, more solid. It no longer flickered like fire. It throbbed like a heartbeat. And for the first time, it seemed to be watching her back. She whispered, "Aoki, what are you building?" The tide pulled in, and beneath the surface, something shifted. The red light blinked once, slowly. Then, just for a moment, Kana saw it, a face, bloated, pale, empty-eyed, and lit from within, like a lantern that had swallowed its own flame. The storm never came, but the wind disappeared. No gusts, no sea breeze, not even the faint rustle of leaves or flapping prayer flags. Just stillness, thick, drenched, as if the entire village had been sealed inside a glass jar filled with fog and seawater. Even the crickets had stopped. In that silence, every sound became a scream. The creak of wood, the drip of condensation, the knock. The knock. It came again that night, louder than before. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, not frantic, not begging, patient, measured, and coming not from the front door, but from inside the house, from every wall. First, the living room, then the hallway, then behind the shrine, then beneath the floorboards, as if something were circling them, testing each side of the home like a lantern searching for a crack in the dark. Yui pressed herself into a corner, clutching Kana with one hand and a candle with the other. "Don't answer. He's not angry. He's becoming." Kana didn't understand. Yui's voice broke, her eyes wide and distant. "He's not just our son anymore. He's what the sea made of our shame." Then she looked toward the ceiling, eyes fixed on a corner Kana didn't dare look at. "And he's knocking because he wants us to see." Moments later, a new sound joined the knocking, a scraping, long, slow, sharp. From the attic, above Aoki's room. Kana crept to the base of the stairs. Each step up felt like moving deeper underwater. The air was thick with mildew and salt. The candle in her hand flickered, not from wind, but from something breathing nearby. She reached the attic door. It was ajar. Inside, the room was dark, except for a faint red shimmer pooling in the center, reflecting off the wet floorboards. There, in the middle of the attic, stood a lantern, but not the kind they had made. This one was wrong. The frame was built from fish bones and hair. The walls were patchworked from rice paper, stained with eyeless ink sketches, drawings of open mouths, dripping ropes, and people walking into the sea. And at the center of it all, burning with an unnatural blood-hued flame, was Aoki's photograph. Kana stepped closer. The air grew colder. Then, knock, right behind her. She spun, heart crashing. No one was there, but the candle in her hand blew out, and in the sudden darkness, she heard him. A voice no longer human, low, wet, echoing from the floorboards, the ceiling, the walls, all at once. You let me drown. You hid the flame, so I took your light. Now I build my own, one knock for each of you, one lantern at a time. Kana screamed. She stumbled back, fell through the attic doorway, tumbled down the stairs. But when she hit the bottom floor, there was no pain, only wetness. She looked down. Salt water pooled around her, soaking through the wood, rising, and just above the flood line, knock, 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 from inside the walls, as if the house was now a lantern too, one waiting to be lit. They buried the fisherman at dawn, what remained of him. He had gone out alone the night before, ignoring the village's silent fear, determined to fish past the reef line where the red glow didn't reach. He never returned. In the morning, his boat drifted back on its own. The nets were torn. The wooden deck was soaked in brine, though the skies had not rained. And in the center of the boat, wrapped tightly in his own coat, was his body, jaw torn open, mouth filled with seaweed, eyes missing. But what chilled the villagers more was this. A lantern, perfectly intact, was tied to the prow, made of bone and burning without fire, its red glow pulsing from within. The elders ordered a burial, but no one knew what to say, because the fisherman had died like a sinner, but followed no known sin. After that, things unraveled quickly. 3 more villagers were found with hollow eye sockets, each near the shore, each with seawater in their lungs. One woman was discovered kneeling in front of the shrine, frozen stiff, a dead lantern cupped in both hands like an offering. The children whispered of a procession, red lights beneath the sea, dozens now, not just drifting, but walking. Kana knew what they were, lanterns, each one a soul that hadn't floated, each one hand-built by Aoki. He wasn't just haunting them, he was replacing them, turning shame into structure, guilt into glue, family into fuel. That night, she crept back into the attic. The strange lantern still burned, but now there were others, 3 in total. One made of crab legs and twine, one sewn from a child's pillowcase, one that dripped constantly, as if crying from within. Each glowed faint red, each hummed softly, like wind blowing through bone. And at the center of them all, resting on the shrine built of wet driftwood, was a new photo. Her father. His picture was scorched around the edges. The ink had bled into a red halo, but his eyes had been scratched out. Kana backed away in terror, but as she turned to flee, her foot hit something soft, round. She looked down. A bowl of eyes. Fish eyes. Human eyes. All floating in a thick black brine. All staring up at her. Then she heard the knock. Not from the attic. From her bedroom. Downstairs, her mother wept at the altar, but not for Aoki. She wept as she carved bone, her hands raw, her mouth whispering again and again, "If I build him one, maybe he'll stop." Kana reached for her. "Mama, no, please!" But Yui looked at her with eyes so bloodshot they looked boiled. "You don't understand, Kana. He doesn't want forgiveness, he wants structure. He's building his world, and we're the light inside it." That night, the sea glowed brighter than ever. The village stood paralyzed in fog, and just beneath the surface, rows of red orbs marched, in rhythm, in silence, toward shore. Each one a lantern, each one made from someone who once lived. And at the head of them all, a taller flame, brighter, darker, flickering with a hatred that no longer needed a face. Aoki, or what he had become. No one in Fukami lit a lantern that night. It wasn't that they forgot, it was that nothing burned. Candles refused to catch. Lamps hissed and died in cold silence. Even the shrine flames, the ones fed by sacred oil and ancestral ash, flickered, coughed, and went black. Every source of white or golden light vanished. Only red remained, faint, distant, and wrong. Kana sat in her room, frozen in the dark, watching the window. She no longer waited for footsteps or knocks. Now she listened for breathing, low and waterlogged, like someone exhaling from under the floorboards. Outside, the village looked like a painting scorched at the edges, fog glowing crimson, rooftops swallowed in shadow, streets pulsing with the slow heartbeat of underwater fire. And then she saw it, the procession. Hundreds of lights, once scattered beneath the waves, now lined the narrow path from the sea to the shrine. They did not flicker like fire. They moved. Each step was exact, measured, too human to be wind, too lifeless to be alive. At the front walked something taller, its limbs long and soaked, its face masked in red paper, crumpled and wet, its body wrapped in torn fishing net, dragging behind it the remains of half-formed lanterns, unfinished, still dripping, still hungry. Yui saw it too. She crawled to the window and whispered in a trembling voice, "That's not our son anymore!" Kana didn't answer, because deep down she knew it was and wasn't. Aoki had returned, but not as a spirit seeking rest. He had returned as a ritual reborn, a new force, a new rule, a new god of shame built from broken rites and weighted guilt. The villagers began to scream as their homes filled with seawater, from nowhere, from beneath, from above. Walls bled salt, ceilings cracked, floors warped with brine. And with the rising flood came eyes, eyeless fish crawling through cracks, shells spinning in circles like compasses gone mad, and in every mirror, in every puddle, faces, hollow and grinning, watching for a single blink of weakness. No one lit a light, because the red had taken its place. It seeped into everything. And then from the shrine at the heart of Fukami, a bell rang. But not 3 chimes like morning, not 5 like morning, only one. Low, wet, final. A single knock from the center of Fukami, echoing through the fog. A summoning. Yui turned to Kana and whispered, voice hoarse, "He's not knocking anymore. He's calling." And outside, the sea answered. It rose without waves. It walked without form. It burned without flame. And Fukami obeyed. The shrine of Fukami had once been a place of light. Every death began there. Every lantern was blessed there. Every prayer whispered under its old cedar beams echoed into the sea like a promise. We will remember you. We will send you home. But that night, it had become something else. The fog clung to the shrine like flesh. The wooden beams were blackened with mildew. Salt bloomed in crusty veins across the stone floor. And the sacred basin, once filled with clear water for purification, was now full of dark brine, thick and unmoving. Kana stepped inside, barefoot, soaked to the knees. The village was gone behind her, the streets drowned in red glow and silence. Only the shrine remained standing and breathing, because it was breathing now. The walls pulsed, wet and warm. The floor oozed seawater between the slats. And at the center, where the offering table used to stand, was a body, not just a corpse. A soaked figure, kneeling upright, head bowed low, skin gray and swollen. Its flesh covered in red-stained paper charms that stuck to its back like scales. One charm covered the face completely. Kana stepped closer. The paper crackled, though it was dripping wet. On its surface were 3 kanji drawn in dark ink that bled like blood. Haji, Dan, Chin. Shame, sever, sink. She reached forward with a trembling hand and peeled the charm from the face. It was her father, Daiichi Fukami. His eyes were gone, his mouth sewn shut with red thread, but his hands clutched something tightly in his lap. A lantern, small, bone-framed, familiar. Kana gasped because she recognized it. It was the same lantern they had made for Aoki, the one they had sunk. And yet, here it was, dry, burning. The door behind her groaned. She spun, and there stood Yui, her mother, soaked to the waist, eyes glowing faint red in the dark. "You shouldn't have come here," Yui said quietly. "He's almost finished." "Who?" Kana asked. Her mother didn't blink. "Aoki." Yui stepped closer, hands behind her back. "He needs just one more. He has the father, he has the shame, he has the sea. Now he needs the one who looked away." Kana backed toward the door. The shrine began to shake, floorboards swelling, beams splitting, water rising around her ankles. "Mama, don't!" Yui's eyes filled with tears, but they were clear, not red. "I'm sorry, Kana. I thought if I helped him, he'd leave you alone. But he won't. He can't. You were the last one who heard him cry, the last one who didn't say goodbye." The lantern in Daiichi's hands flared brighter, and suddenly the charm on his lips burned away, revealing a mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. Salt water burst from his throat like a geyser. The shrine flooded instantly. And in that rush, from beneath the offering platform, something rose. A figure made of rope, paper, and bone. No face, only flame behind red veils. Aoki, or what he had become. He extended one long, dripping arm toward Kana and opened a palm. In it, a wet, trembling lantern frame, unfinished, waiting.
inviting. Kana screamed, but the sound drowned, because the sea was inside now, and the shrine was no longer a place of memory. It was a workshop, a sanctum, a forge of new gods, and she was the final part.
The shrine collapsed before dawn, not with fire, not with thunder, but with silence. It sank slowly, as if the earth beneath it had turned to mouth and opened wide. The beams cracked, the roof bowed inward, and the red glow that once pulsed from within faded beneath the rising tide. By sunrise, nothing remained but a thin circle of fog hovering over black water, and a single ripple moving outward endlessly, like a wound that refused to close. The villagers did not speak of it. They stood at the edge of the shore, eyes wide, feet half buried in cold sand, watching the horizon, waiting, because something had changed. The red glow was no longer distant. It now floated close, too close, no longer beneath the sea, but on it. From the cliffs, you could see them. Eyes, dozens of them, floating on the surface, glowing red, each the size of a lantern, but they didn't flicker. They blinked, once, together, in rhythm, as if watching, as if breathing, as if deciding. Inside the Fukami home, Kana did not wake. Her bed was soaked in salt, the floorboards warped around her. Her body remained still, but her eyes twitched beneath closed lids, caught in a dream not her own. In her mind she walked through endless fog, barefoot on wet sand. Aoki walked beside her, but he no longer had a face, only a mask of red parchment, gently glowing with fire beneath. He did not speak. He only reached out, and in his hands offered her a lantern. This time it was empty. "You kept yours," he said at last, "but it never burned." Kana looked inside the lantern. There was no wick, only a mirror, cracked and glistening. She saw her reflection, but it had no eyes. And from behind her, hundreds of lights marched across the water, each one shaped like the soul she had forgotten. When she awoke, it was already evening. Her mother was gone, her father's photo was missing from the altar, and at the center of the room, placed carefully where the shrine incense once sat, was a new lantern, framed in brittle reeds, paper made from her childhood drawings, now yellow and warped. Lit from within, but the light did not flicker. It stared like an eye, unblinking. And just beside it, scrawled on the wooden floor in salt, was a single sentence: "One light left." That night the villagers gathered for the first time, not in unity, not in hope, but in surrender. They lined the shore with their backs to the sea, eyes closed, lips moving in broken prayers. No one dared to look behind them, but from the silence they could feel it. A presence, walking slowly along the sand, stopping at each home, knocking once, then waiting. And above it all, from the highest cliff, a new lantern appeared, brighter than the rest, heavier, burning from within like it held a sun that had drowned. It did not float, it hovered. And when it turned, yes, it turned, the villagers saw its shape at last. A face, one they had all known, one they had all buried, Aoki. But his eyes were no longer empty. They were flames,
and they were looking for the last light that dared not shine.
The next morning, Fukami did not wake. It simply existed, half submerged in silence, choked in mist. No birds called, no oars struck water. Even the wind seemed forbidden to pass through. And yet, every home smelled of smoke and salt, as if something had been burned and drowned at the same time. In the center of the village square, a circle of red lanterns had appeared overnight. They weren't hanging, they stood, rooted into the ground by bone stakes, their flames breathing like lungs. At the center of that circle lay a body, wrapped in wet silk, eyes gone, mouth open, hands curled around a half-built lantern. It was Yui. Kana found her mother by following the scent. Her bare feet slapped against damp stone as she stumbled into the square, drawn by the low hum that now infected the air. It wasn't music, it wasn't chanting, it was construction, the sound of building, of ritual, of something being completed. When she saw her mother's body, Kana didn't scream. She just sank to her knees, reached for the lantern still warm in Yui's hands, and wept. Because she recognized the frame. It was hers. The one Aoki had begun for her in the attic, the one missing its light. Yui had tried to finish it, using her own bones, her own blood, her own breath. A mother's final offering to protect her child from becoming the final part of the ritual. But it was not enough. From the fog beyond the square came the sound of knocking. Not on doors now, but on wooden drums. Rhythmic, deep, like a heartbeat struck with malice. And then the sea spoke, not with waves, but with movement. Hundreds of red lights emerged from the mist, walking not on water, not on land, but somewhere between. Their feet did not disturb the ground. Their bodies swayed like drowned marionettes. And at the center of them all was him, Aoki. No longer boy, no longer son. Now robed in woven netting, sea glass, and paper prayers, his arms stretched wide. From his chest, a lantern burned, lodged deep inside his ribs. The light within it pulsed in time with Kana's breath. "You were supposed to carry me," he said, voice echoing from nowhere and everywhere. "Instead, you buried me. You gave me no light, so I built my own." He lifted one hand, and all the red lanterns in the square flared, casting shadows that moved on their own. Behind Kana, the villagers began to emerge. Each held a lantern, each stepped into the circle. Each had empty eyes. And one by one they began to chant. "Float the soul, light the shame, build the God that knows our name." Kana clutched the half-finished lantern to her chest. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I was just a child." Aoki tilted his head. "So was I." He raised his other hand. From the sea, a final shape emerged, larger than the rest. The shrine, but changed. Its wood was blackened. Its roof was stitched with ropes of hair. Its entrance no longer faced the ocean. It faced the village. And its doors opened. Inside glowed a massive lantern, spinning slowly,
built from bones, faces, and eyes that flickered like embers. There was only one space left within its frame, a small empty cradle, the size of a girl's heart. The ritual was almost complete, and Kana understood now. This wasn't about revenge. This was remaking. A new order built from forgotten rites, severed names, and the heavy silence of those who dared bury their shame instead of lighting it. She could still run. She could still hide. But the moment she looked into her brother's flame-filled eyes, she knew. She was already inside the lantern.
The sun never rose again over Fukami. Days passed, if they could still be called that, without light, without shadow, without change. The fog became eternal, not simply weather, but judgment, woven through every beam of every house, clinging to skin like mold to bone. No one spoke anymore. Those who survived the first night now wandered like husks, faces blank, hands trembling, lips muttering only one word: light, light, light. But there was no light, only red. And it no longer came from lanterns, it came from the eyes. The villagers' eyes glowed faintly at night, as if their souls had been set aflame from within. They no longer ate, they no longer slept, they simply watched the sea, the sky, each other. And above them all, from the shrine risen anew at the cliff's edge, the great lantern spun, not fast, not slow, just enough to let the world know it is still being built. Kana had not spoken in days. She remained hidden beneath the floor of her childhood home, curled beside the withered body of her mother. Yui's hand still held the unfinished lantern, now cold, now dark. But one night, the glow returned. Not from outside, from within the house. Kana woke to the sound of weeping, not sobs, but soft, wet breathing, like someone crying through cloth soaked in seawater. She opened her eyes and saw footprints, wet, bare, glowing faint red, leading from the altar to the stairs, then to her hiding place. And then came the voice, low, broken, loving. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I built this for us. A hand reached beneath the floor, pale, swollen, fingernails blackened by salt. You were always the last piece, Kana. The light that never flickered. I kept it burning for you. Kana screamed, but no sound escaped. The fog swallowed it, the floorboards dissolved around her, and suddenly she was standing again in the village square. Except now it was underwater. Not drowning, not floating, just suspended. The buildings leaned like sunken tombstones. The shrine towered above, its lantern pulsing like a heart in a jar. And around her, the villagers moved in slow circles, their mouths stitched shut with red thread, their eyes glowing as they chanted without sound. Float the soul, light the shame, become the flame. Aoki stood at the center, arms outstretched, eyes flickering like lanterns in a storm. In his chest, the great flame roared, no longer a glow, but a firestorm of memory. Every guilt, every silence, every failure to speak, to act, to mourn. This world you gave me was too dark to live in.
so I made a brighter one." He stepped forward and held out the lantern Kana had once built from bone and thread. "Let me place your light inside, and it will never go out again." Kana looked down at her hands. They were burning, not with pain, but with recognition. She had carried shame her whole life. The night she heard her brother sobbing behind his door and walked away. The morning she watched her parents seal the lantern and said nothing. The years she pretended he had faded like fog. She was the last wick, and now she could choose to let her flame join his or to light a new one in defiance. She stepped forward, took the lantern from Aoki's hands, held it to her chest, and whispered, "This light is mine." The flame burst, the fog screamed, and for the first time in an eternity, the village of Fukami was bathed in something that wasn't red, but white, blinding, cleansing, final. And far, far below the sea, 100 lanterns blinked once and went dark.
The white light did not last. It shone like the sun once forgotten, pure, brilliant, cleansing. It swallowed the fog, cracked the blackened sky, scattered the red-eyed dead into ash. But light in Fukami never stayed, not white light. It was a flare, a gasp, a final defiant heartbeat, and then it was gone. What remained was silence, the kind that lives in deep oceans, the kind that presses into the bones and tells you you are not supposed to be here. Kana lay on the wet ground, her hands blistered, her chest scorched where she had held the lantern. The object was gone, burned away, or consumed. She couldn't tell which. Around her, the village was no longer a village. It had become something else. The houses were hollow shells. The shrine had collapsed again, this time into itself, folding like paper soaked through, and the sea had pulled back, but it had not calmed. It seethed. The waves did not crash, they watched. Every ripple turned toward her like eyes below the surface, waiting, because something was still there. Him. A tremor split the beach. Kana struggled to her feet as the ground beneath her quivered, not with quake, but with breath. The sea exhaled, and then, from just beyond the tide, the water bulged. Not a wave, not a swell, a shape. It rose slowly, dragging barnacles and bones, seaweed curled like hair. At the center was a figure, bigger now, heavier, its body woven from hundreds of failed lanterns, stitched with the sins of every family that ever buried light in silence. It had no face, only a hole where a face should be, glowing red, roaring inward. And from its hollow chest, a voice called out, not with words, but with flame. "You took my light. Now burn with me." Kana backed away, her legs trembling. The tide surged forward, swirling around her ankles, dragging the sand from beneath her feet like an invitation to fall. Behind her, the villagers began to emerge again, not alive, not dead, but caught in the in-between. Their bodies cracked open, spilling not blood, but embers. Their eyes glowed dimmer now, like coals waiting for breath. They didn't speak, they didn't move. They just watched. Her and the thing in the sea. Aoki, what was once Aoki, began to take form from the water.
his arms extended, jointless and long, fingers dripping with seawater and soot. His spine cracked as he stood tall, and his chest opened, revealing the original lantern, the one Cana had held. Inside it burned a memory. She saw herself as a child, standing at her brother's door, hearing him cry, and walking away. The lantern flickered. Cana fell to her knees. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do." The figure tilted its head, and from deep within its core, the voice answered not with rage, but with grief. "Neither did I." And for a moment, the sea went still. No fog, no sound, only the lantern beating softly like a wounded heart. Cana stood, tears streaking through the soot on her cheeks. "Let me finish it. Let me build you a new one that floats." The lantern inside the creature pulsed, once, twice, then dimmed. The figure froze. The tide paused at her feet. And then, slowly, it sank. Not in anger, not in hunger, but as if it had been waiting for someone to finally say those words, to acknowledge him, to remember him, to set him free. The villagers collapsed in unison. Their flames went out, their bodies stilled, and the sea, for the first time in weeks, receded, taking with it the shame, the silence, the unfinished, and Aoki, lantern and all, drifting, floating, burning red, but now gently, not cursed, but mourned.
3 days passed, or maybe more. Time in Fukami no longer moved forward. It settled like silt in black water. No more red lights glowed beneath the sea. No more knocking echoed from the walls. The fog, though still present, had lost its voice. It became a whisper instead of a weight. And yet, nothing returned to what it was. Kana remained in the house, alone. The altar had rotted through. The tatami mats curled inward like dried skin. The photos of the dead, once placed with reverence, were gone, burned, eaten, forgotten. Only one thing remained intact. The unfinished lantern Yi had tried to build, her mother's final act, her final prayer. It still lay by the window, half-formed, held together with strands of her hair and old stitching thread. And inside it, tucked between 2 ribs of fishbone, was a folded piece of cloth. Kana opened it with trembling fingers. A note, ink faded by brine and time. "If I light this for him, will it be enough? If I burn myself to keep him warm, will he forgive us? If I become the wick, will he float at last?" Her mother had known. She had known what they had done. And in the end, she had tried to make amends the only way she knew how, by giving everything. Too late, but not meaningless. That night, Kana climbed the cliff behind the village. The shrine had vanished entirely, reclaimed by stone and sea. But the shoreline was still stained, a faint red hue baked into the rock, like memory that refused to wash away. She stood at the edge with the unfinished lantern in her hands. The sky above was still fogged, but she swore, for just a moment, she saw stars, faint, flickering, like distant lanterns floating on a tide far grander than the sea. She lit the lantern.
This time, not with red flame, but with a spark from her own palm, a match she had kept hidden all this time, wrapped in a scrap of her brother's old jacket. The flame caught slowly, unsure of itself. It burned blue, then white, then, finally, a soft gold. And when she placed it on the water, it floated. It didn't sink. It didn't spin. It didn't cry. It glowed, gentle and small, carried outward by a tide that had at last learned to let go. Down below in the village, no one stirred, because there was no one left. The houses remained, half eaten by salt and guilt. The boats rocked gently, though no ropes held them, and the sea was calm. But Kana knew, somewhere in the deep, her brother saw that light. Not as revenge, not as hunger, but as the thing he had needed most, a goodbye. And in the windless hush that followed, the fog finally lifted, just a little, enough to let her see her own reflection in the water. Her eyes were clear, her face worn, but she was still here, not as a victim, not as a wick, but as the one who stayed and lit the flame.
The next morning, Kana gathered what was left. She didn't cry. The tears had dried somewhere between salt water and silence. What she carried now wasn't grief, but duty. The village deserved a burial, not of bodies. Most had vanished into the sea or become part of something no one dared name, but of memory. If she didn't remember them, who would? She started with names, whispered them to herself like old songs. Haruto, who sold eel by the docks. Old Jen, who used to light 2 lanterns, one for his wife, one for the son who never returned. Sayo, the midwife with trembling hands. Little Ren, who used to leave dried squid in Aoki's lunchbox when no one was watching. One by one she whispered them, then stitched each name into red thread, tying it to what pieces of fabric, bone, wood, and shell she could find. She wove them into small, crude lanterns, nothing sacred, nothing blessed, but honest. There were 37. Some were misshapen, some still smelled of the sea, some barely held together, but they were real. They were not built from shame, they were not forced by guilt, they were not asking to burn someone else's light, they simply were. By dusk, Kana had placed all 37 lanterns in the bay. She did not chant, she did not kneel. She just stood barefoot on the wet sand and watched. The tide came slow, careful, as if it too had learned fear. But when it touched the lanterns, it did not take them under. They floated, each one wobbling, then finding its balance, glowing gently, not red, not blue, but gold, like the first breath of dawn behind fog. For a long time, Kana stood there, alone, watching them drift, until they disappeared beyond the curve of the earth. She turned back toward the village. No one stood behind her, no voices called her name, but she could feel them, present but not haunting, waiting but not hungry. The dead finally honored, and Aoki,
she would never know what became of him. But in the depths of her chest, just below the scar left by the lantern's burn, she felt something warm. Not a presence, not a ghost, a quiet understanding. You remembered me. That was enough. Kana took a deep breath, and for the first time since the knocking began, the air smelled clean, like sea, like smoke, like thread, and the path home, for the first time, felt light beneath her feet.
Fukami no longer appeared on maps. The road leading into the village had collapsed into earth, long soaked and cracked. The old signpost was gone, washed away in a storm no one remembered. And if you asked the elders from nearby towns, they would frown, squint toward the sea, and mutter, "That place? That was years ago. Fog swallowed it. There's nothing left, only stories." But stories remember what the living forget, and sometimes so do lanterns. Kama stayed, not because she was trapped, but because the village still needed a witness. The houses remained in ruins, the shrine was dust, the people were gone. But every morning, when the tide receded just enough, the shore would shimmer faintly, like a memory stitched into wet silk. There, in the tidal pools, flickered small golden lights. No longer red, no longer cursed, just soft and waiting. One morning, Kana returned to the place where it began, the cliff, where the first lantern sank. She stood there with nothing in her hands. No lantern, no thread, no guilt, only a breath. The wind came, gently this time. It lifted her hair, not like a warning, but like a touch. Down below, the sea was calm, and beneath the surface, something glowed, faint, familiar. It did not move toward her. It did not knock. It did not beg to be seen. It simply burned, quiet and steady, like a boy who had once wanted to drift into light, but was forced to sink in silence. Kana closed her eyes. "You don't need my forgiveness," she whispered. "You never did. You needed someone to look back." And she did. That night, for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, the stars returned. Not hidden, not muffled, clear. Above the broken village, above the ruins, above a girl who had lit every lantern, not with ritual, but with remembrance. And far below, in the quietest part of the sea, a final lantern blinked once, not as a curse, not as a warning, but as a farewell, and then went out. Fukami was never rebuilt, because it didn't need to be. Some places are not meant to rise again. They're meant to be remembered, like a name stitched in red thread, like a knock that was finally answered, like a soul that no longer needs to float because it was finally seen. And that is enough.